Thanks to a couple of people who left a comment in the previous presentation, I was made aware of a recent interview with Warhorse Studios' combat designer and director, Mr.Viktor Bocan, as conducted by Philip Soboda of Zing Gaming Magazine. The main highlight of that Q&A was a revelation of how master strikes are actually performed. So in this video, we're going to discuss what it means for us players and how it could influence the melee combat system. In addition, we also have several observations gathered from a series of short promotional clips released by the devs themselves, ranging from an interesting development regarding archery to an indirect but significant update to pickpocketing, not to mention having another reason for keeping an eye on dodging attacks. If you'd like to check out the footages up for examination today, their links are available in the description, alongside everything else that will be shown here. Okay, let's begin. According to the English captions of Victor's interview, he said that master strikes are done by attacking from the opposite side during an enemy's attempt. On my part, this was a complete surprise, because it's far removed from how they're done in the first game, and the contextual clues given through the combat icons led to an entirely different assumption. Nevertheless, an MS is essentially the same to preemptive attacks we talked about before, where if we intercept a strike with one of our own upon seeing the green shield icon, our hit would land first and stagger the enemy. The only difference is that it has to come from a specific direction, away from where our foe's weapon will be coming from. Due to the combat star being reduced to 4 zones, performing master strikes with this new method is as clear-cut as possible. When our adversary initiates an attack from the right side, we respond with a counter from the left, and vice versa. So far, all examples shown were from the horizontal axis, but I have no reason to suspect that it would be any different for the vertical ones, especially now that thrusts are mapped onto the reticle 6 o'clock position. Since we don't have access to the game just yet, it's hard to say for certain how difficult pulling off master strikes will be, but for the time being, we can at least identify the factors surrounding it. They're potentially challenging to do, mainly because the player must keep an eye on 2 things at once: the opponent's weapon direction to figure out where our attack should come from, and the green shield icon, which signals us when to do so. If you have lightning-fast reflexes and can press the attack button immediately after seeing the symbol, you'll probably be fine regardless of the direction you counter from, because it's either you'll perform a master strike or at least a preemptive attack. However, if our response time is on the slower side, it's still possible to pull off an MS, but we'll have to make sure that we can clearly see where the attack will be coming from before we try it. This is because we have visual evidence that sometimes enemies will do a feint, meaning they'll switch directions when the green shield appears. Within one example, we can see this bandit brandishing an axe to the right. In preparation for a master strike, the player shifted their weapon to Henry's left side. However, as the icon pops up, the bandit quickly switched directions before attempting a slash. In this case, the player was already committed to swing from their left, and because they were able to do so immediately after seeing the symbol, it still resulted in a preemptive attack. But if their reaction time was just a hair late, it's Henry who would have ended up getting hit. In my opinion, this is where the risky part of performing master strikes will come from, if we fail to recognize a feint and counterattack too late. However, if we manage to do so from the correct direction, it's still hard to say at this point just how large the window for it will be. In most demonstrations, they do activate when the player responds as their opponent's weapon starts to move forward. But there are also a couple of examples where Henry's arm motion seems to be unnaturally fast, as if trying to compensate for his adversary's animation. This could be an indicator that the timing allotment for an MS might expand a little bit more as he gains experience, giving us a bit of headroom to make adjustments as necessary. Now, I reviewed all fight footages we have so far, and I've only seen combatants do a feint 3 times, twice by bandits and once by Master Menhard, so I'm not sure how widespread this move amongst NPCs will be. In any case, the effect of changing how Master Strikes are done is not isolated to its execution difficulty, because such alteration also directly influences the other aspects of melee combat, which address some of its shortcomings from the first game. In KCD1, NPCs have an advantage of being able to Master Strike a riposte. This is a move that's unique to them as far as I know, and is one of the reasons why a lot of players turn to just using MS in battle, because it can get really frustrating when we're busy exchanging perfect blocks and ripostes, then suddenly they counter with an unstoppable move. Now in the sequel, there is proof that enemies are still able to do it, seen during the first livestream demo when Henry fought Master Menhard. At the beginning of their duel, Sir Toby perfect blocks a cut from the left and decides to riposte on the same side. However, the problem with this strategy is that a fighter's arms automatically switch directions upon attacking or defending. And in this case, Menhard's stance was repositioned to the right side afterwards, which sets him up for a Master Strike as Henry attempted to slash from the opposite end. I'm not sure if the player can pull off a similar move, because out of all the examples we've seen, they only show Henry Master Striking normal attacks. But even if he could, I assume it would be very challenging, mainly because the direction of where a fighter's counterattack will be coming from can't always be anticipated. For example, there were a couple of moments when Menhard perfect blocked a slash from the side but decided to riposte from above, and vice versa. We'll also have to contend with the fact that there are variations to its speed depending on the weapon type, where arming swords, as we've noted in the previous video, have a potential to be incredibly fast for doing ripostes. Regardless if this move will be available to the player or not, one key takeaway from the information we have so far is this. If we don't want Henry to get hit by a Master Strike, normal attacks should be unleashed either in the same direction to where our opponent's weapon is being held, or better yet, on any of the two immediate sides. So let's say our foe is brandishing it on the left. Given his current position, we can choose to attack from there, up above, or do a thrust below. If they have their weapon raised up, this means slashing from the same direction or within the horizontal axis should be fine. And when it comes to ripostes, the only thing that's really needed to be kept in mind is to not counter in the same direction we perfect block an attack from, because of the way stance switching works. In other words, getting hit by a Master Strike will no longer be a random occurrence, but we'll have to pay attention where we land our offensive moves at all times. That's the theory anyway. By the looks of it, melee combat is shaping up as being relatively easy to get started on through perfect blocks and ripostes. But once we start incorporating Master Strikes into our skill set, or at least try to prevent Henry from getting hit by it, things get complicated really fast. The fact that even brigands can at least feint their attacks is enough to make one reconsider their next move. This is with regards to that specific skill alone. I haven't even mentioned the updates surrounding factors which contribute to overall warfare, such as weapon characteristics and dodging. We'll talk about those next. During his interview, Mr. Bocan briefly talked about the defining qualities of in-game weapons per type, and the one which stood out to me the most is when he said that pole weapons, like a halberd, is unwieldy to use, but very good at keeping enemies at a distance. Now we do have clips from episode 2 of the live action series demonstrating its normal attacks, which verify that they can indeed be used in such a way, mainly because, as we've talked about in previous videos, getting locked into a fight no longer feels like we're tethered to the enemy, and therefore their tremendous reach actually matters this time around. In real life, a straightforward way to bypass its range advantage is by using a shield and charging forward to close the distance. But as we can see here, the force of Henry's blows is making his opponent stagger, even when he managed to block some of them. So whether this strategy would work in KCD2 or not is unknown at this point. On a similar note, Viktor also said that maces are great for piercing armor, and it reminded me of when Mr. Adrian Bushi said that axes are great for doing the same thing. What it means for the actual damage calculation of bashing plated gear is uncertain, but I would like to see axes in particular at least have an advantage against shields, because splitting them apart is one of its proficiencies in real battles. We're already aware that it's possible to destroy such defensive equipment. However, there's also evidence of it being able to stay intact, even after getting blasted by a firearm up close. So the effectiveness of axes with this matter still needs testing. As far as technicalities are involved, a sword is the most intricate weapon type of them all. Even though Viktor mentioned that it's not good against plate armor, there was also a hint from Adrian that it's still possible to win against an opponent wearing such gear through combinations. Because out of all the examples we've seen across multiple videos, it's very clear that both short and long swords possess chain strikes which target different parts of the body. So if we're adamant about using such weapon type against heavily clad enemies throughout the entire game, I assume what we'll need to do is memorize all combos and learn to quickly scan our foe's armor set for vulnerabilities, then use appropriate ones which target those specific areas, while mixing it in with other moves. Since the goal of defeating them include draining their stamina by landing multiple hits, then we might as well do it through combinations. The only limitation here is that perfect blocks and riposts are relatively easy to do, which will stop combos in their tracks, so I'm not sure how frequent we'll be able to pull them off against experienced fighters. Whichever melee weapon we choose to wield, and whether practicing master strikes or memorizing combos should be prioritized first, another technique we should keep an eye on is dodging. If you watch the previous analysis presentations, you're already aware that it's now easier to do, and there's even a good chance that invincibility frames exist. But these two factors combined don't really mean much if the player cannot take advantage of a well-timed evasion. In the first game, any attack after successfully avoiding a hit is considered as being normal, which means most of the time it will be defended against one way or another. Now in KCD2's official showcase, there was an example of Henry successfully connecting a thrust after dodging a slash. And at first I thought it was just a standard one that happened to find its mark. But as of this recording, we now have multiple examples where the same result occurred. Therefore, my informed guess is that every time we dodge a blow where Henry repositions himself somewhere towards the side or rear of an enemy afterwards, our immediate counterattack is always guaranteed to land. If that's the case, then it would be a very powerful move in one-on-one fights, maybe even more so than master strikes because it's much easier to do. There's even an example where Henry connected 2 slashes consecutively, so nothing will prevent us from trying to execute an entire combination in such cases. About 3 months ago, I posted a short clip where I said if Warhorse Studios wanted to make archery a little bit easier for KCD2, they could apply the arrow trajectory adjustment they implemented in a Woman's Lot DLC from the first game. This is because in the main storyline, the projectile always flies somewhere in the upper left from our arrow's tip, which means we'll have to adjust our aim in both X and Y axes. However, in Teresa's gameplay, the arrow's path has been recalibrated to be much closer to X, and we can visualize it as shooting in a vertical line right next to the tip, which means we'll only have to guesstimate our aim by raising or lowering the bow. Judging by the promotional video, which showcases the sequel's archery, this is exactly what happened. We can see here that the arrow struck this soldier around his right clavicle, which is in line with the altered flight path. If it was still using the classic one, he would have been hit on his outer shoulder, if not miss. You'll also notice that the weapon sway upon drawing the bow is gone, although there's no way to verify just yet whether this is going to be the default animation or if skill level still has something to do with it. Apart from archery, there's also a slight modification for when slashing at enemies on horseback. If you've seen the tutorial video on how to do it in KCD1, a suggestion I gave is to just attack on our horse's right, because the animation for it is much faster in comparison to the other side, which has a slight delay. But according to this clip, this will no longer be the case. The swing motion on the left is now equally fast. Meanwhile, pickpocketing seems to have retained most of its features. Apart from the aesthetic revision made to its UI and simplification of the detection color, everything else from KCD1 seems to have been carried over. The only update I noticed is related to NPCs themselves, because they used to be oblivious to what happens after Henry successfully goes through their stuff. But thanks to this clip, which shows a townswoman patting down her pockets, there's a good chance they'll now be alerted a few moments after something goes missing. The amount of information mixed in with theories that we have right now is already quite overwhelming, even from an onlooker's perspective. And I assume the situation will only magnify as we move on from analyzing videos to actually examining the game. In any case, KCD2 is already on my Steam library, so I will start immediately after its release, and we shall see where Henry's adventure will take us next.